Hello, everyone. I think we should go ahead and get started. Thank you so much for coming and bringing all your hats and coats and scarves and gloves. It's so nice to see all of you. Welcome. I'm Meredith Kelling. I'm the Assistant Director for Research and Student Engagement at the Center for the Humanities, and we at the Center are really excited to welcome you to this roundtable, which kicks off our annual Redefining Doctoral Education workshop, part of a multi-year Mellon-funded initiative to redefine how graduate students in humanities doctoral programs are trained. Today's roundtable, and I'll let Laura introduce our guests in a minute, promises to be an enlightening discussion on public humanities work and scholarship for graduate students. This is an opportunity for us as a community to hear about ways to put public humanities into practice for ourselves and our grads, to be inspired by the work of others, to learn about ways to connect through humanities that may feel newfangled and innovative, but are also older than the academy itself. I thought we'd start by saying just a little bit about why we're doing this. A significant part of my work these days is committed to finding ways to support our humanists in training as they prepare for what lies beyond the dissertation defense. I speak of what lies beyond rather than simply career planning to signal towards what most of us know intuitively, that the humanities are not simply what we do for work, they are the shared property of the public. In committing to humanities scholarship, we have appointed ourselves as stewards, in a sense, over humanities archives and theories and methods, but really the humanities are for and about everyone. And more than that, they foster the preconditions for a commitment to the idea that all humans deserve to live lives of dignity. Sure, being a humanist can and should involve getting paid and having a career, and sometimes even in the academy. But the work of a humanist is connected to something beyond. The humanities are always urgently needed because they are central to the capacity to imagine worlds beyond this one. And here I'm thinking of Judith Butler's really most recent remarks on the humanities and democracy, which I think are on LitHub now. Since enacting democracy requires imaginative and collective work, the beginning of democracy, they write, requires a transport into a necessary fiction. I'm heartened by these and other reminders that humanities work is, broadly speaking, the co-creation of new worlds and new possibilities. Some of what public humanities offers us, as our panelists will soon inform us, are both the practicalities and the theories behind such necessary engagements. We in higher education are often engaged in a defense of the humanities against various foes, but the public humanities remind us that it's not just that the humanities, academic, public, or whatever else, require defending. It's that the doing of humanities itself constitutes a defense of humanity, of difference, and of culture. So doing humanities work and building publics and collaboratives can and should go hand in hand. In graduate seminar rooms, but also in prisons, in the most prestigious of museums and archives, but also in the most exploited of neighborhoods. So when we are talking today and tomorrow about where to start, really, graduate students, you have already taken a major start in committing to a PhD program of study. We encourage you to keep exploring, keep connecting, keep innovating into new areas, new audiences, new sources of inspiration, and new collectives. We at the Center for the Humanities are in this work with you. We're excited to do it and to find the many different answers to the question of how to be a humanist in the world. I have to conclude by plugging some related programming that will be running this spring towards the aims of training doctoral humanists for not just the tenure track. So this summer is the first summer of our 3-year NEH-funded Humanities at Work program, in which we'll be placing 5 PhD students into paid internships in local organizations. See our website for details. The application is due next week. We'll be having a Crafting Your Humanities resume session a week from today online. It's on the website. We're hosting an info session on applying to the ACLS Leading Edge Fellowship for recently graduated PhD students on March 6th. See the website for details. I should just stop saying that or say it more. You can intern at the center as an MPE anytime during your post-coursework career to learn about how the higher ed humanities ecosystem works in a variety of ways. You can apply for a ready mini grant to fund your own innovative projects. Funding proposals will be accepted on a rolling basis until May. And you can apply for a Divided City Summer Research Fellowship, the details of which are going to be posted on the website soon. So that's 5 opportunities I listed right now. Please know we are here to support the graduate students of today. We are here to collaborate with departments on supporting the graduate students of today. So without any more delay, I'll return this discussion over to my colleague, Laura Perry, the Center's Assistant Director of Research and Public Engagement, and therefore the ideal moderator of this discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you to Meredith. Wow, I feel like you should be on the panel now because this is just fantastic. Yeah, and thank you all for coming. I'm going to jump in. I'll share a few brief details about our guest today, but as you can imagine, it is really impossible to sum up their breadth and depth and heights of work. So please do look them up, and also please join us at the workshop tomorrow, where they will each be leading a session, and you'll have a chance to connect with them further and learn more from what they do. So I also encourage you to check out Kendra Sullivan's work. She sadly could not be here today because of illness, but we are making plans to bring her to WashU soon. Also, thank you all for sitting in the exact order that I have your bios on this page. Wow, we're already in total alignment. Desiree Barron-Callaci is a senior program officer in U.S. programs at ACLS. There, she contributes to various projects in ACLS's portfolio of fellowship and grant programs, with an emphasis on programs that promote innovation in doctoral education and publicly engaged scholarship. Desiree received her PhD in cultural anthropology from New York University, and before joining the ACLS in July 2019, she worked as a birth and postpartum doula in Western Massachusetts. Janine Utel is an award-winning writer and editor and the Associate Director of Academic Program Services and Professional Development at MLA. Until 2021, she was Professor and Chair of English and Creative Writing at Widener University. She is the author of 4 books and multiple edited collections, and a new book project is in progress with the truly fantastic working title of Professions for Women and Institutional Bullshit. I cannot wait to read that. Janine has also written on topics related to higher education, the humanities, writing, and leadership and mentoring as a contributor to Inside Higher Ed, Hybrid Pedagogy, and the Chronicle of Higher Education. MJ Rymsza-Pawlowska is associate professor at American University, where she researches and teaches 19th and 20th century American history. She's the author of History Comes Alive, Public History and Popular Culture in the 1970s. She's active in DC's local history community and serves on the board of Humanities DC and Washington History Magazine. Her research has been featured in the Washington Post, the New York Times, and Time Magazine, and she also appeared as a commentator on Netflix's D.B. Cooper, Where Are You? Documentary. So thank you so much for joining us on this cold day. And I also want to thank Desiree, because we were going to stick Kendra with this first kind of difficult question. And Desiree just stepped up to say she would be willing to answer this question in Kendra's place. So I so appreciate it. So my first question for you, and of course, other people jump in. Desiree's not solely on the hook for this. And it's a question really that there's no one right answer to. But what are the public humanities?
Thanks for that question, Laura, and I'll thank all of you in advance for forgiving me for answering this in such a pedestrian way, but I'm going to start from the broadest possible way, looking from the public in to the academy, and then from the academy out. So first of all, anyone in the room who knows that they have participated in public humanities programming, if you're able to raise your hand, would you please? Now, if you keep them up, anybody else who has a public library card? Anybody who's seen a television program on PBS that was funded by the NEH? Anyone who's seen a public lecture by an academic? All right, I think I've gotten nearly everybody in the room. So that's a lot of us are already in these publics, right? Even beyond the academy. But if we're talking about how one might talk about the public humanities from the academy out, I'll borrow a typology from Daniel Fisher at the National Humanities Alliance. This is on the Humanities for All website, very useful typology. He gives 5 types of public humanities project. One with which you might be the most familiar is defined as outreach. So this is a scholarly program delivered for a general audience, right? Second would be engaged public programs. So those are public programs where you're delivering content, but it's not just about delivering content, right? It's about an exchange with community members who are themselves empowered as knowledge bearers and contributors to the conversation. The third, engaged research, where you're actually doing a humanities research project with that kind of public engaged in that sort of empowered way. Fourth, engaged teaching, where you're doing teaching that involves any of the above forms of public humanities. And then five, infrastructure of engagement, and that is that sort of broader question. There's a really broad infrastructure of institutions that enable the public humanities. I named some of them: libraries, the National Park Service, the National Endowment for the Humanities, your universities and colleges, local history trusts, many organizations and individuals involved in this work. And I will let my more august colleagues answer in more depth.
Hello, sorry. You can tell I don't often work with microphones. So first of all, everything I have is just going to be adding on to this from perhaps a different direction. So Laura mentioned that I'm a historian. I'm kind of a historian. My degree is actually in American Studies. So I always say I'm an interdisciplinary practitioner of humanities. But what I do in my kind of institutional phase is that I teach and often direct a master's program in public history. And kind of thinking about public history has really transformed my understanding of public humanities to focus a lot more on kind of concrete publics. I suspect that this is because public history kind of has its own really specific institutional history, which I can talk at great length about to anyone if they're interested in, but I will try to, but I'll try to keep it brief. But essentially for public history, what it's kind of always casting itself in opposition to is like regular academic history. And because so much public history practice came out of like oral history and collaborative exhibition, there's more of an onus on kind of publics in very concrete ways that when I think about public humanities and public history, I think about really, and this is a lot of what we do with our students, is really trying to imagine who those publics are and thinking about them in concrete ways. So thinking about people that could benefit from your work or vice versa, or conversely how your work might be changed if it was presenting for a public. So one of the things that I think is like the most amazing thing about public history or in public humanities is this kind of opportunity to make your work reflective and responsive, because it's always being changed for, with, and about the public. This is, by the way, the typology that we always end up using. To bring it back to the humanities, I think that's the kind of emphasis on the humanityness of it all, right? Because it makes sure that what you're doing is really, really hitting, because you are always putting the humanity right there via thinking about the public.
Hello, hi. So both of these, both sets of comments from my fellow roundtablers here prompt me to start somewhere I wasn't necessarily intending to start, and that's what I did before I came to the MLA, and how it sort of prepared me to do the work I do at the MLA. And I hadn't really thought about it until, MJ, you were talking, and then Desiree, as you were providing the, Fisher's typology from the NHA. So I started, I took a fairly traditional academic path and got a tenure track job. And I landed in Philadelphia, which is a great place to be an academic, and it's a great place to do public humanities work. And so I never felt like I wanted a traditional, conventional academic job, even though I had sort of a tenure track position. I wanted to do something else. I wanted to sort of be out having other kinds of conversations, and I didn't really know how to do it. I wasn't trained to do it. But I got involved in various community organizations. I got involved in nonprofits. I did some work at the Rosenbach Museum and Library. I did some work with the Delaware County Public Library System. And so all of these experiences kind of tapped into my disciplinary expertise, but it got me thinking very differently about the kinds of audiences I wanted to reach and the kinds of impact that our work as humanists can have. And one of the things I'll talk a little bit about, I think in a bit, is impact and how we think about impact and what kind of impact we want our projects to have and on whom, and how that impact can be sort of created, co-created collaboratively with the people with whom we're working, the communities with whom we're working. And so when I decided to leave my job at Widener and go work at the MLA, all of those experiences actually really helped me quite a lot in thinking about, working with folks who might be interested in other kinds of career pathways, might be interested in other kinds of humanities professions, might be interested in seeking out other kinds of collaborations and other kinds of communities beyond the academic. I sort of feel I want caveats and everything, like publics and academic and humanities, like all of that, but no. And then the last thing I want to say, and this goes back to the typology, I think I'm here a little bit to talk about the infrastructures that support public humanities, and I'll talk a little bit about that. But I want to just pick up on the engaged public, the sort of co-creation of knowledge, the shared research work that public humanists can do with the communities with whom they work, sort of developing those collaborations and those knowledges together, and then engaged teaching. I think we'll all probably touch on this over the course of this conversation and tomorrow, but I don't want us to lose sight of the ethical imperative behind all of this, right? The sort of, the need to work equitably with publics, whomever they may be. I saw you had Devarian Baldwin's In the Shadow of the Ivory Tower on your bookshelf. I also have it on my bookshelf. And no way. I bet. And his work underpins in a very, very foundational way the MLA guidelines on publicly engaged scholarship, which I'll say more about. That ethical imperative was really what drove the organization's creation of these guidelines, and I don't think we should lose sight of that as we're thinking about the ethics of working with publics, the ethics of supporting people who do this work, often in a way that is undervalued by their institutions, and the ways that public humanities work can prompt other forms of access to the humanities for communities who might not otherwise necessarily think that the humanities are for them. So that was a lot, I'm sorry. Oh, Modern Language Association. The MLA is the Modern Language Association. It is one of the largest organizations dedicated to supporting scholars and teachers and practitioners in the humanities, specifically languages, literatures, and cultures. Thank you for asking.
Yeah, and just to add on too, I think one thing that I really appreciate about the public humanities is that it makes us re-ask the fundamental questions about ethics and the ways of doing what we do, because we're reaching new audiences, and sort of that helps us see some of our research ethics or ways of teaching and pedagogy. And so the work outside, beyond the university, in quotes, influences the work on campus as well. Ideally, yes, ideally. So MJ, I have sort of a related question to kick it off for you. Some students don't necessarily see themselves in public humanities, and that's not why they came to grad school. And so why should students in traditional scholarly pathways pursue these methods of engagement? For example, as part of a dissertation or in planning their careers.
If you're a student in the humanities, the public is somewhere in how you think about the work that you're doing, unless you think that you're doing work in a weird, I don't know, space vacuum or something. That's somewhere along the way. You are thinking about real problems that affect real people. Working publicly makes you a better and more rigorous and more interesting scholar, because it forces you to imagine your scholarship in the public sphere and think about it with actual stakes involved and the potential of actual impact for people. It makes everything that you're thinking about sort of more real, right? It gives you new perspectives on problems that you might be grappling with, gives you the opportunity to make actual impact early in your career if you do public-facing work, and especially if you work with publics. Work directly in a kind of co-creative, engaged way. You have the potential to change the way that people think about things, or have the way that you think about things changed, which is also really amazing and just as transformative and amazing and awesome. The other thing too, and I know a lot of this is I know the reason that initiatives like this exist is, because of career stuff, right? And so I will say this, there's no one-on-one relationship. If you do a public humanities project, like you'll get a job doing that public humanities thing. I wish there was. But doing public humanities puts you in interesting networks that can actually help you more organically chart a career path, and particularly if you are committed to an actual place that has, by default, an actual public. The sooner that you can start working with those people, the better way that you can launch yourself into a cultural network that, again, will change your life in really interesting ways and maybe make it so that you can live in a city that you like after grad school. So, for all of those, both kind of practical, material, and also intellectual reasons, it's really, really worth it. The last thing, too, I'll say is there's a million different ways to do public humanities scholarships. So what we'll be doing over the next day is kind of charting all of those different ways. It isn't that doing public scholarship has to be like writing an article for a prestige journal or something. It can be a different, a collaboration with us. So kind of what Meredith was saying at the opening, like it can be different kinds of collaborations. It doesn't necessarily have to be about producing. It can be more iterative. It can be about being present. It can be about helping someone else do really good public work. So think about it in that way.
I guess I can go next. I promise I'm a humanist, but I'm a little bit of an outlier in that I do have a social science degree. But I will say that in some ways, the research that I've done fits into the traditional scholarly pathway for an anthropologist, and in some ways not. And just to very, very briefly describe what that is, I worked with the Te Hika o Te Ika Maori Rugby Board in the North Island of New Zealand on a project that was about youth rugby and the relationship between those sort of the cultural education happening in Maori youth rugby and the use of indigenous cultural property in international rugby promotion. The All Blacks haka, which you may have seen. In any case, doing that work required getting approval from that Maori Rugby Board and from a lot of folks in that community that put me through a process that I found, well, no, it just arguably was. It took longer and it was more intense, and it required more accountability, and it required more external funding, frankly, for my project. But at the end of the day, the Institutional Review Board was very easy. I sailed through the NYU Institutional Review Board. That standard was, much less rigorous in terms of actually proving that you being there was not extractive, right? And it is extractive if there's absolutely no benefit for the folks that you're working with, even if you aren't doing harm. You're taking up space, you're taking up people's time. And in some cases, they're sharing very things that are extremely meaningful to them because you're talking about public history, right? Which is personal, which is familial, which is all of those things. In any case, that's a very long way of saying that in some ways, grounding that work, making that work more difficult, more accountable, more, as Singh might say, increasing the friction can actually be really generative and productive.
It's a great point to say that friction can actually be generative. It's not necessarily a thing that is a barrier. Your point, MJ, reminds me of some of the graduate students we've met doing the Public Humanities Incubator at the Modern Language Association. So this is the third year we've done it. It's a competitive application process, and we choose 12 graduate students. And we put them in pods of 4. No, 3. Oh my gosh, my math is so bad. No, it's 4. See, humanist. Numbers. No, it's 4 pods of 4 people each with 4 mentors. And they work over the fall semester on projects. They develop projects. They think about scope. They think about dissemination. They think about accountability. They think about collaboration. And they present at the annual convention. They do sort of lightning rounds on their projects. And the projects change dramatically from the moment of application to the moment of presentation. And one of the things that we've talked a lot with the students about when it comes time to present at the convention is this is all in process. None of this is finished. None of this is complete. These are ongoing projects. There's such a feeling that it's got to be done. It's got to be perfect. It's got to be finished. And it's never going to be any of those things. And that's okay. And it's good to share the work if it's at that stage and if it's in that, it's processual. But the other thing that's been really interesting, part of the application process is to ask students about their professional development goals. And so not just what's your project, but what are your goals for the project and for your own development. And we find that as a result of going through the incubator experience, students start to envision themselves along career pathways that they never would have imagined. They think about themselves working in areas that were not clear to them or were not visible to them until they participated in this process, until they met mentors working for the National Park Service or working for Humanities New York. And so I think that if we're going back to the question of why would somebody want to even think about entertaining work in the public humanities, alongside or in lieu of even more traditional academic training, I think some of that might be why. It allows imagining publics, it allows imagining new forms of humanistic scholarship, but it also allows imagining professional fulfillment in ways that you might not have necessarily thought of.
A follow-up for you, Janine, which is, well, it's secretly just the next question, is everything that everyone has described on the panel so far sounds like a lot of extra work. Desiree, you were describing how your project took longer and was harder. Given the additional labor that public humanities scholarship and work takes, how does public humanities scholarship count in the academy? Broadly, but also for grad students in particular. And what are some of the strategies that you've seen where people can advocate for that space?
I really would like to hear from my fellow panelists on this too. I'm going to get sort of nuts and boltsy here, and I'm hoping that what I provide is some useful information. I love this question and I hate this question because I hate the way we count things. Thank you, right? I hate it, but I love that we're thinking about how to do it differently. So, and I feel like one of the things that I've been really sort of proud of in the couple of years that I've been at the MLA is being part of those conversations. And so I want to make sure that I capture this, and I'm going to talk a little bit about it in my part of the workshop tomorrow too. But I'm going to get a little bit down into the MLA guidelines. It's so long. The MLA guidelines on evaluating publicly engaged humanities scholarship in language and literature programs. But I think it's broadly applicable to work in the humanities. If we want various publics to value the humanities, then we need to advocate for our institutions to value publicly engaged scholarship in the humanities. And I know a lot of really good work is happening here in that area. And the folks who need to do this work are people in leadership roles. It needs to be tenured professors. It needs to be deans. It needs to be department chairs. And part of the guidelines is helping folks in those roles do that work. Here is how you ask the right questions about publicly engaged scholarship. The word rigor came up twice, and in ways that suggest that the public humanities, publicly engaged scholarship is rigorous, right? The process that you talked about, Desiree, and MJ, you're thinking about, public humanities scholarship as rigorous when sometimes institutions, departments, hiring committees, promotion and tenure committees don't see it as rigorous. First of all, we can question even just the term rigor, but it has its own values and it has its own ways, it has its own methodologies, it has its own ways of, forms of dissemination, and all of these need to be taken seriously for what they are, and you need to be asking the right questions of this kind of work. And so we're trying to advocate for structures that support graduate students and early career scholars in publicly engaged scholarship. We're trying to advocate for structures where the work can take place and where it can be recognized for the contributions that it is. I would recommend taking a look at the guidelines, even as they're sort of geared a little bit towards helping make the case for, let's say, promotion or for tenure or for a hiring committee, I would say look at them early, look at them often, and think about how to talk about your work in places where people have the power to make certain kinds of decisions. And until I think we see a more widespread change, these are conversations that we're going to need to continue to have. And I'm hoping that the guidelines help with that. And so how can we change the terms of what counts? The guidelines lay out for those seeking recognition for their work, as well as people doing the evaluating, doing the hiring. The guidelines seek to present a means of ensuring that the work counts by changing the terms of what it means to count something. A lot of departments, and this is from the guidelines themselves, a lot of departments find it difficult to define, identify, evaluate public humanities scholarship because the outcomes of the work don't necessarily fit traditional models and measurements. They depend on collaboration and the decentering of traditional modes of knowledge, creation and dissemination. A lot of times people doing the hiring, doing the evaluating are not themselves expert in this, and it is expertise. And if they don't have the expertise, then it's a process. Let's get them up to speed on what that expertise means and what it looks like. A lot of times publicly engaged work is counted as quote unquote service, which is another word I hate. I believe deeply in service, but I don't necessarily think the way we talk about it in academia is generative or constructive. And in a lot of places, service itself is undervalued. And so there's sort of a double whammy of not seeing this work as valued. And graduate students may run up against these constraints early on. We've seen this, with students coming to work in the Public Humanities Incubator or who are applying for the Edward Giuliano Fellowships that we offer, which also supports publicly engaged scholarship. They're not finding the support in other places. And so where can they find the support? Where can you find the support? How can we provide the support? Maybe you run up against resistance in trying to do something that's not a traditional dissertation. Thank you to the ACLS for making sure that that kind of work is supported and valued. So the guidelines look at, they ask those in power, honestly, to consider what would be the scope and the impact of a publicly engaged project. Is substantial work being undertaken? And what are the effects on communities? How does it change what we know and what we think we know about humanistic work? What is the form and the dissemination of the project? Is it taking a form that is not a monograph? Is it a podcast? Is it an exhibit? Is it sort of, is it a film series? Is it any of the number of things that publicly engaged work, the forms that they can take? Is it print? Is it digital? Is it participatory? To what extent are the existing deliverables clear? If you can make a case for the outcomes and the impact, then that's a case that should be heard. And then to what extent is there an ethical collaboration with the communities involved? And the guidelines actually say, one of the things that the guidelines speak to very strongly is when you're evaluating publicly engaged work, you need to be evaluating the extent to which the collaborations that are part of that work are ethical, equitable. That's key. It's not just does it demonstrate rigor? It's how are you working with the people with whom you are co-creating this knowledge? And I think your workshop is going to cover a lot of this tomorrow too, MJ. So again, I think it's great to take a look at the guidelines to get a sense of how people are thinking about this question of counting, but ultimately it's incumbent upon those in leadership roles to heed the call to broaden understandings of scholarship beyond traditional modes and genres, and recognizing the expertise that's happening in this work. That was a lot, I'm sorry. I'm not going to say anything else.
It's a meaty question. And two, also, I wanted to encourage people to check out the recording of a November 6th event that the Center for the Humanities and the Program in Public Scholarship co-hosted on rethinking tenure and assessment. And there will be a follow-up event this spring, and it'll really get into the question of how do we count things and how can our values shape our metrics, and also thinking about ways that we can then advocate for ourselves, for others, in counting things in a different way. And actually, we left the November 6th event with a lot of hope about the ways that WashU is it's starting to change. Exactly. Yes. 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 MJ, jump in.
Yeah. First of all, I emphatically second everything that Janine said. Yeah, find the faculty members and the administrators on your campus who are invested in doing this. And like the thing is there are going to be a lot of faculty members and administrators invested in this because there is institutional money going in this direction. If they're not in your department, there are actually lots of departments on campus where people get like tenured and promoted on creative work, collaborative work. So like go talk to people in like the arts department or people in filmmaking. Like we're not doing this from scratch. We are looking at places where we can adapt and find different models of evaluation. That's one thing. The other thing, and this goes back to Laura, the question that you asked about, like, why should you do this if it's like really hard work and maybe more work? I'd say it's really different work. It's not a one-on-one relationship that like, instead of sitting here writing my dissertation, I'm like wasting time like making a zine or something. It's not one or the other. I would also, like, public work doesn't have to be all the project. It can be a teeny tiny part of it. So like, maybe one day, instead of like sitting at your laptop and like staring at the screen, you go and have a conversation at the local library where you are a member with a bunch of people who might have some like tangential connection to the question that you're working on. And something that comes out of that conversation will like probably spark you to think about the question that you are thinking about in a different way. And like, guess what? That's public humanities. Like, you've just done it. You also like organize an event that you can put on your CV and like probably met some cool people that you can collaborate with on other stuff. Like, that's actually how it works. And that's not hard work. That's really fun work. Or if it is, if you're a person who's interested in public humanities, which I'm hoping that you all are, unless like a professor forced you to be here, in which case I'm sorry. The last thing that I'll say about, and also you do get kind of really tangible skills. So like project management, collaboration, outreach and programming. Like in our public history program, we're constantly finding ways to build this into our syllabi. And it's really hard. The academic structures aren't necessarily meant to be mapped upon public history projects or public humanities projects. The last thing that I'll kind of say, something that I'm really interested in thinking about what people like in my position could be advocating for and are advocating for, is that in institutional contexts, any kind of scholarship, public or otherwise, is really focused on goals and sort of deliverables. And there are moments of kind of iteration or planning that are just as valuable intellectual work that aren't really built into any form of assessment or any form of reward. So I think you mentioned in the intro, I'm on the board of Humanities DC, and there's a grant that we're doing right now that's like, I'm more excited about this grant than anything else, is because it's a grant for people who are in the iterative stage of projects. So the way that the application works is that you demonstrate that you are a person who's embedded in a community and that you have some questions that you would like to think about with that community, and you get $10,000 and you are in a cohort with like 4 other people who are doing that. And, at the end you like maybe make a podcast and do a public program. So like there are actual sort of institutional structures that can help move the definition of public humanities outside of this like sort of very narrow institutional definition we have right now. So that's just like, another thing that I think is really important when you're kind of thinking about defining and thinking about what to make count, is think about the little steps and where they are.
Yeah, maybe a little humanist reframe. Where is it valued? Just to follow on a little bit from what Janine was saying, disciplinary societies are a place to go to for this kind of resources. of course, I encourage you to become a member of the relevant disciplinary society. However, even if you are not, often these resources are accessible. So if you're not a historian, that doesn't mean you can't go look at the American Historical Association's resources, for example. National Council of Republic History. I'm not allowed to have any favorites, but the Modern Language Association has some very good ones, and we're talking about tenure and promotion guidelines, which are still already relevant to you as a graduate student, because that is how your work will ultimately, be assessed should you follow that path. In addition to that, best practices documents about public engagement, as well as these small awards. And I know we're going to talk more about funding, but there is a real rhetorical power to competitive funding, even if it is small. So small awards, op-ed prizes at the American Philosophical Association, those kinds of things are CV lines that are very legible in multiple contexts. And there are other advocacy tools from ACLS. I'll send lots of links around, but recently Preparing Publicly Engaged Scholars as a report that we put out featuring a lot of publicly engaged humanities projects that had graduate student participants reflecting on the various personal and professional benefits of engaging in that, and some best practices thoughts about how to value that better at the institutional level. Yeah, that's actually, I keep talking about the disciplinary societies. So the American Council of Learned Societies, founded in 1919, we're a federation of the professional associations that serve teachers and scholars in the various humanities disciplines. So as of now, 81 scholarly associations, including the MLA and the American Anthropological Association, my home association. And we act as a federation of those folks. So we do broad-based coalition works advocating for the humanities, also with our partners over at the National Humanities Alliance and the National Endowment for the Humanities. And then I work on the fellowship and grant making side of ACLS's work, where we use our endowment and funding with our partners to help reward excellence in humanities scholarship, including many public humanities projects at the doctoral and postdoctoral level.
You may remember the workshop we held last semester on the Dissertation Innovation ACLS Fellowship. And also one of the things that Meredith mentioned in her wonderful menu of an introduction, we'll be hosting a workshop coming up on the ACLS Leading Edge Fellowship. And I also wanted to remind you all of the menu of small grants that Meredith mentioned that we are ready to support your work with and to recognize you in an institutional way, whether it's the Divided City Summer Research Fellowship or the READY mini grant. And truly, because we're humanists, we are blessed that $2,000 can really go a long way in terms of a project, and hooray. So yes, just to remind you all of that. But so Desiree, you were already kind of getting into this, and I was getting into it on your behalf just now. But I'm curious how national organizations and funders like yourselves support the public humanities. And so you don't have to rehash anything you just said, because you gave us a wonderful intro to the ACLS, and thank you.
Yeah, I think I'll say just a couple more things about a couple of specific funding opportunities with ACLS, and then a little bit more about that coalition work. I'll start with the coalition work, because I think that's the sort of acknowledging the current moment, doom and gloom sort of comment, which is that I talk whenever I speak to graduate students about the public humanities, I want to just shout the praises of the National Endowment for the Humanities, the Federation of State Humanities Councils, and all of that sort of public infrastructure that exists all around us, including our public libraries and local museums, and really thinking about those as all being a connected infrastructure that we all have a stake in, and that the university has a stake in, and that can be resources in doing this work, and doing this work in a networked way with other scholars and other publics. So I did want to say that work is definitely ongoing. It's definitely something that I'm glad to say that I'm not speaking outside of my pay grade to share the comments of our president, which is that we're going to continue to fund excellent humanities scholarship. And we're also going to continue to support the advocacy work of our disciplinary societies, because they have been out there talking about access to crucial data and about the importance of humanistic perspectives at this moment in terms of our democracy, but also the future of the academy. So that's that part. The part about funding opportunities. Across ACLS's various projects, and also the funding opportunities at the NEH, and also the funding opportunities at the Social Science Research Council and similar organizations, public-facing work is increasingly legible. And you can see that in the selection criteria and calls for applications for these larger interdisciplinary programs. And I can tell you that I see it more and more in proposals that are both made and awarded. That's not to say that all humanities work has to be publicly engaged. That's not everybody's bag, and that's okay. But for those who are interested in doing it, it seems to be something that folks are coming to us with enough of a baked project and a community partner, and they've really brought the work to the point where it's can be recognized as one of a very few, frankly, truly exceptional projects from across an interdisciplinary national competition, right? And then I'll say a few of our programs recently have been really shaped around being really encouraging that type of work at an earlier and earlier level. So the Dissertation Innovation Project, Dissertation Innovation Fellowship program has been mentioned before. And I'll say that the shift into that work from previously supporting dissertation completion was really about thinking about that time to degree as something that is very well grounded and designed by the educators who know how to get somebody through a PhD, and therefore has a very good use. But there are occasions where to do truly innovative work, there has to be more space, right? And that's this sort of question of how things count. And really, that's one of the main types of project that we had in mind in designing that program. There's many kinds of innovation that are possible, but a truly community engaged component that is reciprocal, that is well founded, that is well planned, and well integrated into the theoretical underpinnings of the work is something that we really want to see, and we have seen examples on the website, and I can share.
Thank you. So if either of you have anything to add, I do want to leave time for Q&A, but I know you will also have suggestions for places to find funding and support.
I know the question was about national funders, but let me just shout out to local funders too. So the Federation of Humanities, every state has a humanities council. Washington, D.C. has one because we're not a state, and I work with them very closely, and they're amazing connectors. I have often when I'm like around D.C. and I come across something really cool, I'm like, oh, Humanities D.C. should know about that, and like surprised they already do. So get in with your local humanities funder. They will usually have free workshops. You want to learn how to do oral history, like you want to learn how to do community journalism, you want to learn how to do like arts criticism, like they will have a workshop for you. They have lots of different kinds of grants, but like again, this is where you find that community and this is where you find the network. And the network is where the opportunities come, like both material opportunities, and funding can be a grant, but it can also be a lump sum to, and this happens in DC, or at least used to happen in DC a lot, like maybe it won't anymore, but like consultancies or kind of project-based grants, which come with their own, because they're replacing salaried positions, like it's not, like the larger context of it is not all good, but it does mean that there are little pots of money everywhere to do different types of interesting humanities work. And like if you're in a place like St. Louis, like there's lots of cool stuff going on. So, go out find that too.
Plus 100 to the state humanities councils. They're amazing, amazing, amazing organizations. I'm particularly fond of PA Humanities and also the New Jersey Humanities Council. I live in Philadelphia. I would also say that not so much funding, although again, as an organization, the MLA does provide some funding for graduate students, particularly keep an eye out for the Giuliano Fellowship Program. I have cards, get one from me, and I'll follow up with you and send you all this stuff. But I think national organizations can also lead conversations. So one of the things we're doing this semester is we're running a workshop series for people in graduate education who are looking to do the kinds of reforms and innovations that we're talking about here. How do you incorporate applied and public humanities work into your graduate program? How do you bring in the scholarship of teaching and learning, which is another form of engagement? I think that organizations like ours, and I think even bringing in the state humanities councils, they should always be part of the conversation when we're talking about public humanities. I think convenings, platforming really interesting work, making sure that people know about good models and good cases, and trying to really get the conversation happening, not just in pockets, but I mean, broadly speaking, let's scale it up. I think, we can do that. Take great stuff that's happening at places like WashU and bring it out, and so people know about it, so that people can learn from those really good programs.
That was short. Bravo. Before we get to Q&A, I do have one last question for you, and it doesn't sound as doom and gloom as it may sound more doom and gloom than it's meant to. But you hear a lot about where the humanities are going and concerns for our continued existence. Are the public humanities an answer to that? And also, where will the public humanities go from here? And if you could answer that in 1 to 5 sentences, that would be great. And any of you can begin. Go for it, MJ. I love how authoritatively you grab that microphone.
It's like when you jump off of a cliff. Yeah, go for it. When you push yourself out of the plane to go skydiving. I will say that the public, there's different forms of public humanities, right? There's the kind of institutional public form of public humanities that can get co-opted and go away. And I've seen some really bad things that call themselves public humanities. And I'm like, oh man, this isn't gonna last. But the ways to keep yourself from doing that is be part of a larger network. So you're always in conversation with lots of other organizations and people that are doing public humanities. That's a way to maintain rigor, a way to kind of innovate, a way to find new ways to make impact, or even kind of build your networks and solidify your networks in ways that will, sort of lead to more sustainability. What I will say, so watch out for that. Always be changing, always be adjusting. We are in a very sort of, precarious moment. We have no idea how precarious yet for higher education, for possibly the federal government and funding structures. So, take this all with a grain of salt. But I do think public humanities are the way forward for the humanities at large. Our kind of most classical version of humanities scholarship has to do with sort of the credentialing of expertise, and the ship has sailed. There's no, we're at a cultural moment where anyone can get on TikTok and do a credible imitation of a historian or a person doing cultural critique. We're not going to get that back. So we have to find a different way to emphasize the rigor of methodology in concert with people in public. And that's the sort of best version of public humanities. I'm writing a book about this.
Yes, but not without resources. So that's what I would say about that. Yes, public humanities are a way forward for the humanities, but not without resources. It's no different from the ways that we're talking about the humanities in general. Without the resources, without some material acknowledgement of the value. So yes and no, and yes, I'm hopeful. I think I would say that.
And I'm also curious where you see the public humanities going from here, too, in addition to potentially redefining the humanities, saving the humanities, becoming what the humanities should have been all along, depending on how into them you are.
So into it.
Yeah. So what's next?
So I'm going to answer that question with a question, and that question is, where is the data that might show us the impact of the public humanities? So we were, a bunch of us were at the National Humanities Conference in Providence. Go if you can, it's amazing. And my colleagues ran a session on what data do we need in the humanities in order to understand the state of the humanities, the impact the humanities is having on our communities, on our students, on the world. And somebody in the audience asked, I would like to know the impact that the humanities are having in communities beyond courses and curriculum. And I think about that question a lot. And I think that if we can sort of gain better insight into where these impacts are happening and how they intersect, then I think I would feel like I had a better answer to that question. So I would like to know that in order to be able to answer your question.
It's a very scholarly answer. You have to collect the data and do the research first. How about you, Desiree?
So if I remember, the questions were the future of the public humanities,
Yes.
whether public humanities are the future of the humanities, and where we go from here.
Great. Yes.
So who knows? I don't know. And is the bus still running? Just kidding. I guess I'll say the part of the soon-to-be released ACLS strategic plan, so I can't talk too much about it, that resonates the most with me is about how valuing funding, teaching, and recognizing the public humanities really responds to the ambitions of many early career humanists, both graduate students and undergraduate. And in the same way that a diverse teaching force is necessary to respond to the needs of early career humanists, folks who have this kind of training and this kind of interest in supporting and training in these methods will be necessary. And that's all I know.
Thank you so much to you all. And we've got a little time for questions. I will hand it to you, Meredith.
Oh my goodness. Don't. I can't possibly. So thank you so much for this. This is wonderful. I'm Mel Messier. I'm the Director of Graduate Studies in English here, which will inform the kind of question that I'm asking, which is I'm wondering if you all could talk a little bit about what you would see if you could like redesign grad curriculum, right? Just because it's really easy, right, Stephanie? If you could do it, what would be the ideal form for public humanities infrastructure within higher ed right now, within doctoral education specifically? Would it be like a series of kind of project-specific workshops or incubators? Would it be a kind of certificate program along the model that we have here and many places have, in which someone sort of the sort of like degree plus model, where then you're getting your degree and so you're a PhD in something, and also you are then like certified on your CV as a public humanist. I say that I'm laughing, but I'm not. I'm serious. Or like something else entirely. Like what would be I'm asking the utopia question because there's too much dystopia. So like what would be the sort of utopian goal here in terms of infrastructure at universities?
Well, so I'm not in English, so this might be, but this is, I mean, we do this in public history. We have it with a master's program now, and we're kind of always envisioning ways to do it with our with our like traditional history PhDs. And in fact, a lot of our history PhDs are people from public history backgrounds who want to get public history jobs and have some aspect of public kind of work in their dissertations already, where it's not codified, but the way that I would like, but we think a lot about how to codify it. I think the way that we would like to see this done is, so for example, one easy way is more kind of fellowships that are like what MLA is doing, or what ACLS has done at various times, that like instead of being a TA where you're helping someone teach a class, you are a TA like in an archive, or the local humanities organization, or in a community that really needs you. We have, so on campus, my colleague Dan Kerr has a project called the Humanities Truck, which is, you should look this up. It's amazing. And I've worked with them a lot. It's like basically a truck that does the humanities. It's a truck that on the inside is a white cube gallery, and on the outside has a scrim and speakers, and also has its own stage and oral history equipment, and like a label maker and like lots of other really fun stuff. It's funded by Luce and Mellon. So it's the only reason this exists is because of funding agencies, and that's worth noting. But we have, that truck has graduate fellows. So there are doctoral students who, for several years, work at that truck, form relationships with communities, and students not only in history, but also in anthropology, sometimes in communication studies. And that really ends up, they often end up doing all the research for their dissertations there. So the public part isn't necessarily like the writing. It's that they, do community-based or community-engaged research. Some of it's written up, but then there's also kind of public elements of the way that they're disseminating information. So there are kind of ways that it's already happening that aren't really reinventing the wheel, but I think building it into the kind of apprentice training of doctoral education is like is a way that we've been able to do it so far.
I think I would agree with all of that. I think that, building it into the coursework, I like, building it into certificate programs. I think internships are key. I think they're really critical. And yeah, I think I would just, but one thing I would say too is as a, language and literature person, I would not want to see necessarily disciplinary expertise sort of get displaced in thinking about the training part of it, right? Disciplinary expertise, I think, can be sort of the deep iceberg underneath that is sort of holding up a lot of the work that then can be done with various publics and in the community. So that sort of magical melange of, yes, you are getting that deep disciplinary expertise, but you are also sort of apprenticing in these other kinds of ways. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess the only thing that I'd add, see ACLS's website for Building Blocks for a New Academy, where we showcase some of these interesting new approaches that departments have taken. I think one of the things that's been really interesting is seeing, and we'd have to describe those in more detail at length, but structures and processes that can equitably facilitate relationships between departments and local organizations. It really militates against the university's general tendency to be the place where everything can happen, to really focus in on what those local resources are. But there's such a richness that can come from that. And in terms of, to put it blandly, professional development opportunities, but vocational discernment opportunities, that can be really powerful. And then just some, there are cultural changes that I think, completely agreeing with Janine, but again, beginning conversations about where folks work after graduation at the moment of admission means that we have more of a conversation about what that public humanities infrastructure is and where humanists might find themselves in it.
Can I just plus one the point about an infrastructure that allows for meaningful and equitable collaboration? I think we can talk about the infrastructure of like curriculum and coursework and capstone and apprenticeship and all that. But if essential to this work is those collaborations, that can be the hardest infrastructure to build and involve students in. So.
Thank you so much. Is this on? Okay. I think I have a two-pronged question. My first is, how do you distinguish between going public and going popular, if that makes sense? Like the difference between public scholarship and perhaps popular science or anthropology or whatever. And what would you say to somebody who's just getting into public scholarship and is worried that somehow they're not going to be themselves, if that makes sense, when they go in to the work? In other words, by going public, you become kind of a medium a mere medium for the dissemination of information rather than writing creatively or doing your own thing. I'm not saying I believe that, but I'm just saying that I would imagine that is maybe a concern of somebody who is on the fence of going public. Thank you.
I'll take a go. Popular is if you go viral. No, I'm just kidding. It's not if you go viral. That was a bad joke. I think that, I mean, this is again in the history context, but when we talk about popular history, we talk about history that's not kind of grounded in scholarship. That's more just like a guy on the internet, like reading out loud something that he learned from Wikipedia. Like that's popular history. Or, you know, like, I don't know, like when Marvel does something that's set in the past, like Captain America, like that's popular history. So it's a form of history that has an impact on people. That said, that, you know, like that all forms how people engage with history or scholarship anyway. So even though when we kind of talk about public humanities with a capital P, capital H, that's like a institutional thing that is, you know, put into being by a collaboration between like lots of different institutions and universities. That actually has like, you know, like it's versed in scholarship. It's focused on rigor, evaluation, assessment, learning objectives, impact, all of these different things. So I would say that public humanities is the kind of translation of scholarly humanities, but popular humanities is something that every public practitioner should be contending with, because that informs how your public is also like kind of engaging with scholarship or thinking about the content that you're presenting. In terms of the second question, if you have, I don't think that, yeah, I think if you design a project that you're interested in, it is going to be creative and it is going to change you. I think it's like, I've never been able to just sort of publicly disseminate scholarship that I hadn't already also thought about deeply. So like, yeah, I would say I understand why that's a worry, but you will be surprised to just try it and see, and you'll be surprised that, you know, it also makes you think more creatively often because you're thinking creatively for solutions. Yeah. Tell us who you are too, by the way. Oh. Thanks for the question.
I think as humanists, one of our superpowers is understanding of genre and audience, right? And so I think if you're taking work that is deeply researched and deeply thought through, and you think about it you think about it in terms of like, I'm going to put this in a different container so that other people, people other than people getting it in this container can access it. I think about that a lot, like for whom am I writing and why? And once I get a handle on those things, that I sort of know I know the choices I'm going to make next. And so I think some of this, and I'm a writer, so I come at this from like from that perspective. And I think, more broadly speaking, so many forms of scholarship, whether they're public or not, so many forms of scholarship are themselves creative. I guess I'm really just echoing MJ. I agree. I entirely agree. I started out as a creative writer and then realized I could say what I wanted to say better as a literary critic, but it never stopped being creative. And then when I started thinking about different kinds of audiences, then that allowed for another form of creativity.
And like form itself, like trust the lit person to say that, but like, yeah, form changes things. Form is part of the creative effort. Yeah. Thanks for saying it that way.
No, thank you.
Just to add a further point about genre and form, I've always found that, and again, this pushes up against that question of how much time there is in the day and what counts, but it's always been additive. I went to New Zealand fully intending for all of my ethnographic film work to be produced within the style that I had learned and been trained in for many years. And I showed up, and what was useful for my research interlocutors was helping them work on highlight reel videos and helping them learn video performance analysis. And neither of those things that I think had anything to do with what I was doing, but it ended up actually kind of blowing apart the whole project. Doesn't always work. But it can. Okay, it always works. Make it work.
Well, and I think that's a broadly relevant point too. I mean, ostensibly the purpose of this conversation is to get into the public humanities, but you're really describing the kind of surprises and unexpected turns that can happen in any scholarly endeavor, in any kind of turning point on your career pathway, and just kind of being open to that, just generally, I think is good.
Okay, hi. Hi, I'm Crystal. I'm a fifth-year PhD student in the English department. Thank you so much for your talk, MG, Janine, and Desiree. My question is about longevity. So I love our conversations on how we could convince the university and convince grad students and just get the community involved. But some of the comments that I've heard within the community is sort of like, we don't want to be treated as research subjects, right? And so now the public humanities is big, and I love that. That's great. How do we ensure that there's continuity beyond sort of this explosion in public humanities, right? And I think about that, especially as a grad student too, right? Because I may have spent years getting to know these people. When I leave, how does that work? How is that work continued, right? And I think Mel's question about infrastructure is great. But if we turn the attention to not infrastructure for the university, but for what we're doing in the public, I'm just sort of interested in learning about some things that you'll have seen.
I mean, I do this. So in public history practice, we are always doing applied work. So we're teaching practicum classes where the students do projects for and with local organizations. We do internships, although those are not required anymore. I think and this is kind of always a struggle that my colleagues and I have, is how do you prevent from doing kind of one and done stuff? And the answer for me has been to just kind of cultivate long-standing relationships with a few different organizations who I really like working with, and I really like kind of like collaborating with, and who I know I can actually be of service to, and my students can be of service to, and isn't too heavy of a lift for them, and just going back over and over again and collaborating with them. So, I have like the DC History Center, like Hyrick House, which is a historic museum that's also a historic house that's also a business incubator. Like, we just do stuff over and over with them. So as a faculty member, I try to be the one who maintains those relationships. And also, just make sure that we're not putting anything on them that doesn't make sense for them. So that's one thing. As a person who's just developing a relationship with a community, I mean, obviously first go and, earn trust, go and sit with that community for a while. But like there's ways, if you end up kind of doing a long-standing project, you'll want to continue working with them. And you'll work with them in different capacities. One type of collaboration might look really different a year later, but as long as you're there in some capacity, as long as it makes sense for you, then that's, if you're already thinking about it, that means that you'll probably do it. Like, if you're not sitting here thinking like, what's like a community that I could do public humanities for that would look really good on my CV? Like, that's, as long as you're not thinking that, then you're already kind of doing the sort of ethical work that you need to in order to do that.
Okay, and I just wanted to add one thing there too, is that's something that at the center we try to be that stability too, knowing that undergraduate and graduate students, come here for a degree and they may leave, and that's, thinking of the partners that we have that NEH summer internship with. It may be one and done for that intern, but the partnership with the center will continue. And that is something that I think it's a great question. It's also something that we think about a lot at the center. Yes.
Hi, thank you guys. My name's Asha. I'm a second year sociology student. So I also have a background in public history, so everything you've been saying about public history, I'm like, yes. I have kind of the inverse question of you, Crystal. So a lot of my work is actually rooted in South Carolina, where I'm from, and so obviously I'm not in South Carolina now. It's a little hard to do the work, and I'm a second year, so kind of in this in-between moment of like, you know, you're doing a master's, you're not doing a dissertation, so like, why should we fund you? Like, there's not that many opportunities to like, you know, get the funding that I need to go, you know, back home and like do the kind of work that I want to do. But that hyper localized kind of work is really important to me, to not be extractive in the ways that I feel like sometimes my traditional discipline can encourage, unintentionally or intentionally. And so I guess my question is like, what is your advice for maybe somebody in like the earlier parts of their careers to like maintain, you know, relationships and communities and like to invest in the public humanities, but from a distance, and also maybe just like, how do you do it like so far away? Because even like the things that are offered by the Center for Humanities is amazing, but it's all St. Louis and, you know, Missouri, and that's great, but like, I want to go to South Carolina. So yeah, I don't know if anyone would be able to speak to that. I am.
And I also would say that to your point, and also just that to also, you know, we think of the same questions that are being discussed here pertain to people doing global public humanities. You know, this does not have to be focused. The hyperlocal is amazing because we're here and we're in St. Louis. But if your project is, you know, takes you elsewhere, that kind of work and the principles and the ways of folding it into your dissertation apply on the global level too. But yes, Divided City would hopefully, if you apply, get you to do work beyond the global. The Divided City is funding that goes. I'm just yelling. Funding that goes for could be in St. Louis. It could be we had some people all over the world last year, or it could be a place in the United States.
And I'll do another pitch for the Giuliano Fellowship. The criteria are you need to be either doing some sort of experiential learning that will lead to a career in the, you know, career outside of the academy, but also you're doing research that is 500 miles or more from where you are located. Yes. But your point about how do we do work with the communities that we value and that we're part of when we're far from them, when, you know, mobility is, you know, it's great to have mobility, but that means, you know, you have a different relationship to the community that you're distant from. So it's a really good question.
I have to say, I highly do not recommend doing 18 months of continuous field work on the other side of the planet from one's fiance. But it's something that you sometimes have to do when you're doing a graduate degree at NYU and your field site is in New Zealand. But I will say that that wouldn't have been impossible if there wasn't, you know, relationship building before you get there. Because no one can afford to wait until you rock up and start asking questions. So part of this is just me saying, I feel you, like that work is difficult to do from a remove. However, if you can find the way that folks are finding each other in that space digitally, like even if folks are local, like there will be organizers you're interested in talking to who are connecting to each other digitally, and that might be one place to start. And the other thing is don't underestimate the value of other academics who may be a little bit closer to where this project is taking place. And we'd be very interested in working with a graduate student, particularly if they're liberal arts college faculty or community college faculty who don't always get to work with graduate students. That might be somebody who might be a really valuable resource in building that network.
That's amazing advice. The one other thing that I would say is, I mean, another community that you might be in right now are people from South Carolina who are in Missouri, and and that can be a historic community. It can be a present day community, but, you know, like, what if you find those people and, like, you know, what's their kind of experience of the world, and are there any like questions or stories or narratives that you can engage there? So, like, you know, another way to kind of step out of something that you're already doing, but find a way. Yeah, maybe that's the connection. And so then when you go back to South Carolina, you're like, well, I have all these people in Missouri who are super interested in South Carolina, and maybe we can kind of, you know, do something around that. So that might be something.
So I think, MJ, you brought this up. but how, so the question is twofold. One is about like doing smaller pieces. So your dissertation isn't necessarily an entire public humanities project. So I would love to hear, how parts of your research could be publicly engaged as part of a bigger dissertation. And also in terms of the dissertation, something that I see a lot is this generational divide between graduate students and other early career scholars who are really interested in pushing the envelope and are really interested. And this was kind of the event that Chris Scheberg and I organized last year, was for this is early career faculty, but what are the kinds of amazing innovative things that they are doing beyond the monograph? I mean, and please keep writing monographs if you need to. But the monograph will still be there. But what are some of the innovative things you can do that maybe will give you a series of different publics and will take you beyond the monograph? So how do you advocate for this, right? How do you advocate with your to your dissertation advisor, who may be one of the people who is still quite entrenched and still not willing to recognize that just because we did this in 1975, we should still keep doing this. So I guess, how do you advocate for a piece of your dissertation or part of your dissertation being publicly engaged in some form or other to an advisor who may not necessarily think that that's what you should be doing?
I want to go back to something you said, MJ, actually a little bit ago, about how you might be having a piece of a project that's in process, or there might be a piece of a project that's incomplete. And as you were making that point, I was thinking maybe some of what has to happen is sort of narrativizing the project, narrativizing the process, being able to tell the story. I think handing your retrograde advisor a copy of the MLA guidelines and would be actually a really good thing to do. But I think being able to tell the story of what you're doing can be compelling, and that's not necessarily I'm doing a whole public humanities project alongside a traditional dissertation and trying to do extra work and double the work to please people. No, and we don't want to see people doing that. Like, oh, great, you're doing a dissertation, but because you really, really want to do a podcast, now you're doing both, and you are working 72 hours a day. But I think being able to tell the story might be a little bit of a small starting point.
I'd say, this is also maybe a kind of a good way to teach or like think about project management. Like a lot of times when a student is doing a dissertation for the first time, like part of the issue is like actually writing this like really long thing that has multiple chapters, multiple drafts of each chapter. And something I think that students don't, that like can benefit everybody is doing a lot of outlining, but also just like making lists and saying like, here are the steps that I need to take to produce like a part of a chapter draft that will then grow into that kind of, that kind of sort of like smaller chunking of thinking. And like by when? Yeah, and by when, I don't know, like there's like, so if you kind of start thinking about your project that way, which you could be doing anyway, maybe a little tiny part of it, a thing that you can do. You have to teach yourself this subfield by reading like these 10 books. Maybe you do that like with somebody else and, like produce like a free website about it or something. Just like something small. I think the little parts is actually good. I think if you go to your dissertation advisor and you're like, instead of my dissertation, I'm gonna make like a really giant digital project. Like, I think if one of my grad students said that to me, I'd be like, I don't know. Like, but like a little part of it shouldn't be that tough of a sell, and I think can help. I think the thing that I would say to this student who's trying to like talk about it to their faculty, to a sort of a recalcitrant faculty member, is just like, this will actually help me get this work done and think about this in a different way. In the same way too that little parts of a dissertation become like articles or conference papers. Like this is like, so what's that conference paper? What part of your larger project is it? And what if it was something else?
What if it was something else?
Thank you so much for hanging in there, and I want to thank you. And I'd like to quickly say, if you register for the workshop tomorrow and come, you will get a hat. Humanist hat. So yes, and thank you all so much. I want to go back to grad school so I can be a public humanist from the beginning. All right, we'll see you all tomorrow, I hope. Thank you.